Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev Podcast. So, what if the secret to successful transformation isn't found in strategy decks or leadership mandates, but engaging the wisdom of the whole system? In this episode of the OrgDev Podcast, we're joined from Arizona by Dr. Paul Tolchinsky, a pioneer of full-scale change and one of the most influential voices in large system transformation. With more than 4 decades of experience, Paul has helped organizations around the world navigate complex change by engaging people at every level. From his early work at General Foods, designing work systems that explore the relationship between people and technology, to leading study missions to Japan on total quality and manufacturing excellence, Paul's career has shaped how we think about participation, engagement, and sustainable change. His experience spans the full spectrum from new plant design to startups to redesigning unionized manufacturing environments. Paul's particular expertise is in the design of organizations applying socio-technical principles and whole-scale approaches to the processes of change in organizations. And he's also shaped the development of the profession with his leadership of the European Organization Design Forum. He's the author of numerous articles, and his 2 books have been read widely by people in the field, and his vast experience is underpinned by a PhD in organization behavior and design from Purdue University. So welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from Arizona.
Fabulous. We're really excited to have you with us. So just to kick us off, just bring your work to life a bit for people who are listening. Just tell us a bit more about the work that you do.
Well, I think that I created what I called my mantra many, many years ago. And the mantra was creating places of work that are interesting, meaningful, and fun, profitable and productive as a consequence. And that's been my life's work. How do you create places of work that people wake up in the morning looking forward to going to, being excited about, being motivated for, as opposed to waking up and thinking about the drudgery of the day, right, in some way. And so, the question was, what creates places like that? What is it that people look for and want? And how do you design that? And, and Karen, you said socio-technical systems. And, the reality is every workplace is a constellation of mechanical things, technical things, social things. And so it's the system understanding of how all these pieces fit together. Many, many years ago, I had this question, why do people do what they do at work? Why, sometimes it looks very irrational. And you say, why do they do that? And then you look below the surface and you find that the rewards incentivize the wrong behavior, or the way in which people are organized and limits their ability to think independently. So that's been my work. It started out with small groups, General Foods, designing production lines, literally for new product startups, to moving to something more dramatic and bigger, right? That's, so if you're curious about, creating places of work that are interesting, meaningful, and fun, and I think everybody's sort of got their own hypothesis about what would be the answer to that question. But that's been the essence of my work for the last 45 years.
And you've been closely associated with the idea of whole-scale change. So some of our audience won't be familiar with that. So how would you explain that approach to people?
Well, it's the term whole scale is actually hyphenated, right? And so the reason is whole scale, the work is whole system. And so the whole is about whole system and engaging the whole, quote unquote, right? Whether that's physically face-to-face or in some deliberative conversations. And so the whole is whole system, however one defines that. And the scale is sometimes in working with the whole system, you work small scale, and sometimes in small groups, and sometimes you work with as many people as you can engage, right? However that physically or emotionally might look, and so when we were trying to put a label to what we were creating, the term whole scale was the closest we could come to finding something that would describe what we really mean, right? And it comes from 2 questions, Danny, that I was asked by a client at the time. And he said over coffee one evening, he said, why does change have to take so long? Why does it have, we've been preaching transformation changes 2-3 years kind of thing. And I think it's more of a consulting sell than a reality from an empirical point of view. We had really no idea, but we just made it up. Well, it's going to take a couple of years, right? Took a long time to get to where we are. Don't expect to get something immediately. But his question really caught me because I thought he's being asked to do things faster. He's being asked to do things more efficiently. He's being asked to increase his cycle time. Well, it changes a process. Why can't we improve that process in the same way that we're improving production process? And so I started looking for how do we go faster and what are the tension points and what does that look like? The second question was related, which was, why do the few have to decide for the many? Why can't the many decide for themselves? It seems like a part of the answer to the first question is we spend half our lives trying to sell the solution we've created, right? Which takes too long. If we had ownership and commitment from day one versus day 100, wouldn't it go a lot quicker? And so these two questions were interrelated. And whole scale comes as a consequence of looking at those two things.
So in practice, what does that look like? What have you learned about kind of making change go faster? And
That's a good question, right? I mean, the first answer to that is whole scale presumes that the wisdom is in the system. If you don't believe you have smart people, really good people, people who are maybe smarter than you and I, right? If underlying whole scale, I said there's sort of like two parts to it. One is, what are the conditions that make it worthwhile to do? And what are the beliefs that make it that are necessary in order to do it, right? And the first belief is that the wisdom is in the system. If you don't believe that, whole scale is not the way to go, right? Hire McKinsey or pick your 5 up-and-coming brightest stars and have them decide it for you or tell you what you should do. So it in every change project that we did, reaffirmed the importance of that question. If you believe the wisdom is in the system, you're going to act and behave from a leadership management point of view in a very different way. If you don't, right, then asking them their opinion will only make it worse, not better. The second belief is ownership and commitment only comes from involvement. You can't sell people on your idea. You can, but it takes too long. You have to convince them to it. And then in convincing them, convincing isn't committing, not necessarily. Those words are different. And so if you believe ownership and commitment comes from engagement, then you will find a different way of exploring the change and the transformation. If you don't, then you're just going to lock 5 people in a room, have them give you an answer, and be done with it. So those are probably the 2 most important lessons that we learned that continually get reaffirmed. There are conditions where whole scale is probably more powerful. If you need to move fast, it works beautifully because it engages a critical mass of the system to build momentum towards the change. And there are tools and techniques for doing that. If you need to move fast, it works. If acceptance of the answer, people feeling a sense of ownership and commitment to it, is what will put it over the finish line, then it works because it gives people voice, right? It asks them their opinion. It values their ideas. And so speed, acceptance. The third is information. If people have the information necessary to make a good decision, then you should be fine. If they don't, then it's not going to work very well. And so quality, and the last is the quality of the decision. How good does it have to be? Does it have to be perfect? 1,000 people aren't going to create something that's perfect. They might create something they all can support, but it's not likely to be the most optimal. It is the one easiest to embrace.
So I guess a question just to sort of for people that are just being introduced to it. So what practical steps can leaders take to surface and harness that wisdom? Because I think I love the distinction you're making. Look, if you genuinely believe it's in there, how do you extract it? How do you create those spaces where people are able to share it?
We're asking, whole scale change is asking leaders to lead differently. Not, the term that one of my colleagues uses is heroic. The old business model of leaders is to be the hero, right? The knight in shining armor with the right answer on the white horse and the little silver bullet and things like that. And so we're asking we're asking leaders to demonstrate a different set of behavior and to trust us that if they do that, they'll get to the outcome that they want in a good way. I just did a large group meeting 3 weeks ago, and the leaders' expectations were not high. They were trusting and hopeful, but they'd never experienced it before. And at the end of the 2-day workshop, she came up to me and she was like, "This is amazing. This exceeded my expectations beyond all get out." She knew she had smart people. She wasn't sure if they would show up in a way that would challenge the thinking and push everybody. And in whole scale, you create safe space. You create the environment in which people can express their opinions and not have to be judged for them, or not to be judged for them, or to be argued with about them, right? Just to understand them as a different point of view. And so she was blown away by it. She said, this so far exceeds my expectation. And I thought, and so the light bulbs are going off for her, but it's behaving as a leader in a different kind of way. It's asking good questions rather than pulling out answers. It's convening the right constellation of people with the right mix, people who have the same ideas, people who have very different ideas, right? And this bringing all these different points of view and perspectives together, right, to help inform the decisions. That's different. So we're teaching leaders to behave differently while we're in the middle of the process. We're not teaching them and then doing something. We're teaching them by doing something. Right?
And I love one of the things that you said. You said sometimes it makes more sense to engage a few to generate possibilities that the many can choose from. You can't create what you can't imagine. So it's almost like, in a way, the skill is engaging people in the process and skillfully choosing who needs to be where and when and how to involve them.
Well, I mean, when you bring people together, the fear was, the term is regression to the mean, which essentially means when you bring everybody together, the common denominator is going to be something less than what you would really synergistically hope for. That's the fear, right? And so in doing whole scale change, the question is, how do you stretch people's thinking? How do you push them? You just said, Karen, breakthroughs come at the edge of your thinking, not in your comfort zone, right? And so how do you move people to the edges of their thinking in a way that expands their brains? I call it the rubber bands of people's minds, right? And so, because you can't create what you can't imagine, as you just said. And so you need to give people imagination, but you can't push them over the edge or they'll shut down, right? The fear, the anxiety, the natural reluctance and issues that we have as humans to protect ourselves will kick in. And so it's an exploration, and whole scale change is more about conversations and dialogue, seeing the world each other sees, understanding different points of view and perspectives. And in understanding different points of view and perspectives, we become more informed, become more enlightened. We see things that maybe we never saw before and appreciate them in a different kind of way. That's whole scale change at its basic, simplest level is nothing more than a series of discussions and deliberations that help people move to something different.
And I really like that bit, because in a way it's quite emergent, isn't it? One of the things that you sort of said is that there's a lot of preaching, particularly from our industry, about how things should be. And I think you sort of said, there's corporate rebels in teal, which kind of sort of paints a picture with great excitement. This is what we want it to be. But you sort of talk about helping organizations work out what it needs to be for them in their context, in their particular way, which is quite liberating in a way, isn't it?
In the 80s, 40 years ago, we were practicing socio-technical systems design, which was a highly participative way of helping people rethink their rust bucket organizations. And the answers were almost always the same across every industry. They became cookie cutters, Garen. Socio-technical systems became an answer as opposed to an exploration, right? And so it got routinized. It got, it became a checklist. You have self-managed teams. You have autonomous work systems. You have committee structures. You have pay for skills, pay for knowledge. Check, 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 check. you have a socio-technically designed system. And I thought if we're doing something that is emergent and organic, why are they always coming out looking exactly the same? Right. And so it is about how do you engage them in a conversation that has them deciding for themselves what makes the most sense. I'm very biased like the corporate rebels guys. I believe that what they're preaching as an end is a beautiful end. I share that bias. I don't impose that bias on my clients. They have to figure out for themselves where they need to go and what they need to be and how to do it. And so it's a very emergent, it's very Kurt Levinish, it's action research, it's action learning, right? It's Edward Deming, PDCA, right? It's more about the conversation and the journey that enables you to find a solution that wows everybody. And the moment that you find that, you've got something. But it only lasts for a moment, because as soon as you do it, something else happens. I always tell the story of, we did a project years ago where we were asked to come in and help fix a situation that was 1 year behind schedule with an opening. There was a new facility that had an opening date of, I'll make it up for the moment, 1 June. And here we are 1 June a year earlier, and they're 1 year behind schedule. So we have 1 year to do 2 years worth of work. And the reason why they were behind is because nobody talked to anybody. They didn't talk to each other. They were each trying to do their own thing, and this tension was continuing to keep it slow and keep it behind. And so we taught them how to use whole system thinking, how to bring people together in the room, how to engage them in a conversation that has them creating their own solutions. And over the course of the year, the people working on it got pretty good at managing it. 1 June came the next year, opened on time. The first product that they were supposed to make was supposed to take, the goal for the overall project was to get what they used to do in 15 days down to 3 days. The first products that came off the production line took 7 days. After day 3, which was the goal, they were ready to kill each other because they hadn't lived up to their dream. But they went from 15 to 7, which in and of itself was a paradigm shift. And so the first set of products went out the door. We had to shut the place down for a day and talk about what happened. And the first hour, they were screaming at each other, finger pointing at one another. And one of the workers got up and said, wait a minute. We know how to manage this. We've learned from Paul and my partner, Kathy Dennemiller at the time. We've learned how to do this. We just need to stop fighting with each other and start talking to each other about what happened and why did it happen and what do we need to do. 450 people, Garen, literally self-organized themselves for the rest of the day and the next day to figure out what they needed to do to get from 7 to 3. So it became their way of working. They understood that. The second set of products came in and they went from 7 to 4, right? Which in and of itself was an amazing win, right? I think it took them 3 iterations before they actually got the first one out in 3, but it became their way of working because it engaged everyone in a way that built ownership and commitment. If the plan fell apart, it wasn't somebody else's idea, it was mine. Feel accountable and responsible to fix it. So it becomes a way of working in today's, adaptive work system world. Whole-scale change makes perfect sense. It underlies the best way to do the work.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarizes all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
You've opened up a whole interesting range of questions there, but I guess one thing I was just wondering is, how do you manage and contract with clients? They're living in a world of hopeful certainty. You're saying, well, I just don't know. There's a certain amount of not knowing, isn't there?
No. It's a great question, right? I mean, my example a minute ago is she hired us and she wasn't even exactly sure what she was getting, right? In that moment. I start with whole scale change works when the following things happen, or when you believe the following things. If you don't believe these things, you probably should interview a different consultancy. I have 4 or 5 beliefs. Wisdom is in the system. Ownership and commitment only comes from engagement. You have to honor the past in order to create the future. The pieces and the parts are too complex to fix one at a time, right? That kind of thing. And then we talk about quality, acceptance, speed, right? It's sort of the conditions. If the quality of the decision is important, acceptance is important, speed is important, I know that whole scale change works when those kinds of conditions are met. Even having done that, the essence of whole scale change is engaging the whole system. So the question is, what does that look like? Is that 500 people on a Zoom call doing a hackathon or a jam? Is that 500 people in a room physically together? When whole scale was invented, it was about getting everybody in the room, physically in a room. So everybody was enamored with 300, 400, 500. Whole scale change, I think, probably engaged the largest numbers of people of any of the approaches, whether it was open space or future search is 64 people. That's how Marvin Sanded designed it. So whole scale was the most robust, right, way of actually engaging and describing the process of getting from where we are to some end. There's a couple of models like DVF, which is in the whole scale change book, and Richard Beckhart's. There's a model called DPPE. There's some simply elegant tools that we help to say, here's what it looks like to demystify it, right? If we said we're going to do step 1, but we don't know what step 2 looks like, client might not hire us. So we have to pretend like we know what step 2 is going to look like, but we know between 1 and 2, we're going to have a conversation about, is that still the right? From our experience, is that still the right thing to do? Or how would we adapt it to make it stronger in some way? I think that's, but I always start with the principles and the conditions that we know from 30 years of doing this are most likely to be used, where whole scale would be most likely useful.
So a lot of organizations are wrestling with what AI means for them. So I'm really interested in your take on kind of AI, what that means, how whole scale kind of change approaches might support people with that conundrum they've got at the moment.
Well, there's two. The socio-technical. And so AI is just another technology. Right? It was the assembly line in Henry Ford's day, right, which radically changed everybody's way of thinking about it. AI is just the new technology. And so the question becomes, in today's languaging, we call it AI native. This is the self-organized black factory, right, where it's only bots. But the truth is, humans will never be out of the equation. There's always going to be a social component, whether it's to the people who are designing it, the AI, or the people who are using it and living with it. And so I think I'm not sure what the right word is. We're a little hesitant because it's hard to understand what happens in the black box, right, in the AI thinking. But the goal is still to jointly optimize. It isn't either or. It's what Eric Trist and his colleagues found out in the 1950s was if you don't optimize both, you sub-optimize both. It's that simple. The promise of technology only works if the social system is engaged in a way that embraces it. How do you do that? And so I did a large group meeting 6 months ago, Danny, where we had an empty seat at the table, and the empty seat was AI. Right? And the question is, what information don't we have that we could use that might be helpful to our deliberation? And so the person sitting there with the AI hat on is actually asking the tool, the digital bot, right, its inputs and its advice. And because of its power, you can get things more quickly. AI can give you ideas. It can give you suggestions. It can give you current state, future state, faster than we as humans can think of it. But it's up to us as humans to decide what's the right answer. So there's this dynamic of I include it, I augment my large group work whether it's face-to-face or virtual, with the brilliance and the knowledge and the intelligence of an artificial tool. It's just another technology that I'm embracing. And so, thinking about joint optimization, augmentation, how does, when I used to go to Japan in the 80s, you would walk down a production line and you would walk through the production line, and one workstation would have a robot, and the next station would have a human, and the next station would have a robot, and the next station would have a human. And you look at these and you walk down the production line and you think, why is there a robot here and not here? Right. And the answer was because we believe the purpose of robotics is to save humans. The work is dull, dirty, or dangerous, and they had a whole way of talking about that. Then we automate it. Right? We leave the human where the human is important, and we robotize, automate AI where it would be helpful to humans and or removes risk, liability, consequences to humans, right? And so you never take the human out of the equation, but you use it in a way that helps to inform the choices that only we as humans can make. And only because ownership and commitment only comes from us making them, right? The AI bot could tell us what to do. The question is, would we believe it or not?
That's so fascinating, isn't it? And there's so many organizations that don't have this kind of guiding policy, that it's just becoming what it becomes almost, isn't it? So, Paul, we want to say a huge thank you. We've loved the conversation. I feel we're only scratching the surface. We'd love to invite you back for a part 2 at some time in the future when you're free. We haven't explored the equation DVF plus R, your perspectives on resistance, and also things like deja vu all over again, the lessons that we're losing from the 70s and 80s as well. So if you'd be happy to come back, we'd love to do that.
I'd be happy to do that. You just, a couple of words that are most important to me. Actually, the one that you just touched on is resistance. Right? I think there's a paradigm about resistance that exists in the world that limits its usefulness. So resistance is a gift, and people who resist because they care. If they didn't care, they would let you do whatever the devil you wished. And so there's a whole reframing, Garen, right, of how resistance plays in the change process and in whole scale. And whole scale, we embrace it. I love it. And the louder it is and the more exuberant it is, the better it is. And so we could have a whole conversation just about how you do that and how you tap it in, how you give it voice in a way that has it being appreciated for what it's worth. I'd be happy to come back and have another conversation.
Brilliant. Well, there's a mic drop moment to finish this session. I think our audience would love to have you back. Well, thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate it. We know you're really busy as well. If people want to follow your work, is it okay for people to sort of go to your page on LinkedIn and just to see the kind of things that you're up to at the moment?
No, I'm mostly retired, if you have to remember, right? So I shut my webpage down because I didn't want people calling me and trying to get me to do work. I'm trying to do less, not more. But I'm on LinkedIn. People can find me on LinkedIn. They can, anybody can reach out at any moment. That's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm always open to a conversation in my day to talk to people about what we're doing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Well, we really appreciate it. We've really enjoyed the call. If people are watching this and they've really enjoyed it and they think they know someone else that would really appreciate exploring whole-scale system change, please share the podcast with them as well, and also hit the like button as well. But most importantly, thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
I apologize for cutting it a little bit short. Thank you both so much for doing this.